Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. We do want to continue on with our top stories that we're now following this afternoon. And I want to put this up on your screen. You may have seen or heard a lot about this. This is called the Autopen and what it has to do with President Trump and some of his allegations there towards President Biden. And so right now what we're watching as President Trump has once again declared that pardons and all other measures that former President Biden signed using the Autopen are no longer effective. He said this in a Truth Social post that he put online. President Trump has, of course, repeatedly criticized President Biden's Autopen use, saying that these signatures could nullify Biden's legal actions. So I do want to read that post in full for you now. It's put out on his Truth Social, saying there, any document signed by Sleepy Joe Biden with the Autopen, which was approximately 92% of them, is hereby terminated and of no further force or effect. The Autopen is not allowed to be used if approval is not specifically given by the President of the United States. The radical left lunatics circling Biden around the beautiful Resolute desk there in the Oval Office took the presidency away from him. I'm hereby canceling all executive orders and anything else that was not directly signed by crooked Joe Biden because the people who operated the Autopen did so illegally. Joe Biden was not involved in the Autopen process, and if he says he will be brought up on charges of perjury. Thank you for your attention to this matter, signed there by President Trump. And of course, some of these allegations there, we want to break down everything that we're seeing. And so I want to talk a lot more about this with political analyst Casey Burgett and legal analyst Brian Claywood. Thank you both for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Of course.
Hey, I want to start with you, Casey. The very beginning, let's just start with the very beginning. People may not know what an Autopen is. Can you sort of describe what the Autopen is and what President Biden may have used it for while he was in office?
So you can imagine, given the scope of the office of the presidency of the United States, he's dealing with a lot of paperwork. And they have created, presidents of both parties for decades have used what's called the Autopen, which is a mechanism to automatically sign the president's name on documents, right? And these can range from White House Christmas cards or greeting cards, responses to the thousands and thousands of constituent mails that he gets, to, as we're talking about today, pardons and official documents all the way up to executive orders of the White House. So it's just quickly mechanisms for the president to sign his name on any document.
And so we're looking at a signature of what President Biden's signature looks like when he uses his pen versus the Autopen. And so, Brian, this is where I'm going to come to you on this one. When it comes to some of these documents that are signed by a president with an Autopen, are they legally binding? Is this something, again, that's been used for many years?
Yeah, hey, Christine, I think when President Trump put out that social media post, he was wearing a black robe, right? I think he was pretending to maybe be a judge here because he really doesn't have any legal basis or authority to support the proposition that anything used, that an Autopen used by former President Biden is ineffective. There's no federal law in place that speaks to that says you can't use an Autopen. And then secondly, there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that would require a hand signature by a president to have an executive order or a pardon be effective. And then on top of that, Christina, I don't think there's anything anywhere on the planet that even requires a written signature by the president on an executive order or a pardon.
And so I want to put this up on the screen as well. This is from Fox News. They have a picture of really what's gone viral when it was first put up. We know that President Trump has made a lot of changes there to the White House. And during that time, he put up a wall of all the different presidents, and he used this Autopen to sort of poke fun at this measure that he's brought up several times on social media and sort of offhandedly in press gaggles as well. And so again, Fox News saying there's no legal effect. President Trump announced in a Truth Social post that he would fully and completely terminate any document signed by former President Biden's Autopen, including pardons and commutations. Casey, there's just been so much scrutiny as we see the picture there on the wall that when it comes down to President Biden's use of this Autopen. Has it been this level before with any president in the past? Have you seen anything like this?
I haven't, but it feeds the narrative that the Trump campaign at that time, and obviously the administration since, has portraying about an elderly president and President Biden, who they were saying screaming from the rooftops for a long time that he was not all there and doing the job. He was not capable of doing the job, and then, as this speaks to, maybe not doing the day-to-day administration of the job, which leads to the question: all right, who was making those decisions? And Brian's exactly right, right? Like, there's no statutory authority, there's no constitutional basis for requiring a signature of this. There's no mechanism for a president, Trump or otherwise, to go back and declare these things null and void, especially from something like a Truth Social post, right? It's one thing to fight about it in court, it's another thing to just declare it on social media. So to me, a lot of this is just reminding me of Michael Scott, for my Office fans out there, just screaming, "I declare bankruptcy," and expecting that to have a legal effect the same way that going through the court process does. This is simply not the case, but the scrutiny has never been there. But that mimics and mirrors the scrutiny that the Trump administration and the Trump campaign before that was giving to President Biden, who they say was not doing the day-to-day tasks of the President of the United States.
And so when it comes to that legal authority, this is where you step in here, Brian. I have to ask you, is there a path for President Trump to take that? It doesn't seem like he's taken any. Again, we've just seen the remarks on social media that he would need to take to get anything that President Biden did while in office removed. Is that possible with some of these documents?
Well, let's talk about that. What specifically does he want terminated, right? Let's talk about a pardon, for example. Let's say somebody was in jail, right? And Trump now is saying, sorry, that pardon that Biden issued is no longer effective. I want Joe Smith sent back to jail, right? Because the pardon's no good. How is he ever going to enforce that? Let's talk about enforcement. No law enforcement's going to go grab somebody and throw them back in jail without some kind of court order, right? There has to be a mechanism, legal mechanism, that would mandate that somebody be picked up off the street and thrown back in jail. How are you going to undo an executive order that's already being carried out by Congress? That's next to impossible as well in terms of implementing or executing. So, but one thing I do want to add, Christina, look, if I'm President Trump and I truly want to challenge a pardon or an executive order, because he believes that former President Biden did have some mental incapacity or really wasn't cognizant enough to make these measures, to be enforced. What he can do, instead of using the legal system, is maybe have the House Oversight Committee conduct an investigation on specific items that he thinks should not have been done, like a specific pardon or a specific executive order, and then do some kind of investigation as to whether former President Biden did have the mental faculty before the Autopen was actually utilized to execute those orders. So I think that's really the only path he has. If he does anything in court, trust me, every state attorney general across the country will file a lawsuit for injunctive relief, for an injunction to stop him from doing that, and they would win on that.
And so we appreciate you for breaking down that, Brian, especially when it comes to some of those legal aspects. I want to give some folks a little bit more context here as well, though. We know that while President Biden was in office, he did issue a record 4,245 acts of clemency during those 4 years in office. This is more than any other U.S. president since the start of the 20th century. Most of those acts, as you mentioned there, Brian, were commutations or reduction in sentence. Biden, though, only issued 80 individual pardons. That's the second lowest number over the same amount of time. He was actually better known for issuing pardons by proclamation. So when it comes down to it, it seems, Casey, as we're talking about who really is affected by these Autopen signatures, by some of those commutations, it's a large amount of people. It's not just individuals, as in it was with some other terms before.
That's exactly right. So the scope here is big, and Brian's right again on the legal basis and the lack of mechanisms. Though I hope that we can recognize that just because there isn't a force, so in terms of implementation force, like you see ICE raids going on right now, so a lack of court order there has not stopped a certain police mechanism from causing not outright fear within communities. And for people who have received this type of clemency, especially through proclamation, not by individual name, but by previous sentence, there's got to be a level of fear here. So even if it's a 1% chance, even if you are just worried about the next knock on your door, are they coming for me because all of a sudden this has been eliminated, whether just by Truth Social post or because enough people within the administration, we know this is true, enough people within the administration are willing to carry out the president's wishes, even if they are only declared on a social media post. So it affects thousands and thousands of people who were given an act of clemency, legal clemency by the former president of the United States. They have moved on from that portion of their life, hopefully doing good and better things with their futures. And all of a sudden now it is just upended. It may not be likely that they're going to be individually affected, but still that black cloud has to matter in terms of their investment, their day-to-day operations, to say nothing of just how they sleep at night. So the effect doesn't just have to be legal. It can be just a fear-based effect too.
And it'll be interesting to see where things go from here. And Brian, lastly, I want to ask you this. You just mentioned the fact that there are options for the president to take if he would like to see some of these policies or things overturned. He could call the House Oversight Committee. But is there any way for the former administration, with President Biden in mind, to push back on any legal action that the current president, now pushes forward to see if he can eliminate some of those actions?
Yeah, great question. I think the core issue, for example, if Trump tried to have an investigation done by the House Oversight Committee, the basis for that, Christina, is going to be that former President Biden had some mental health issues, right? That he was handicapped mentally. That's why he calls him Sleepy Joe Biden. And that did not allow Biden to make rational decisions, right? But if you're representing former President Biden and they try to launch such an investigation, rest assured, his lawyers will file what's called motions to quash any subpoenas for medical records pertaining to former President Biden based on privacy rights. And Biden's going to assert that if this went to some kind of investigation. And he would have pretty solid grounds to keep out all of his mental health history and all his medical history to prove some kind of fishing expedition that he wasn't mentally competent to execute these pardons and executive orders.
And of course, we know that this is not the end of it all. Of course, this is just the second time that President Trump has put this out specifically on social media, the most recent time being last night. So before I let you go, Casey, I want to start with you. Anything else we should be looking at as we continue to track where the story heads in the future?
Always in federal politics, and particularly with this president and administration, you have to ask why this and why now? Why does this conversation benefit them? Why are they putting it out there? It's not just random, though there are times where a true social post appears to come out of left field, but you have to ask yourself, what are they trying not to talk about, given the fact that we just spent 20 minutes talking about something that me and my nerd friends haven't spent a minute talking about, right? Like, is there a constitutional authority or a presidential authority to erase pardons writ large from a former president? So why this, why now? Ask yourself those questions.
All right. And so also want to get the final thoughts from you, Brian.
Yeah, I think Casey makes a great point. I mean, this goes above legal. I've been in the legal system for a long time. I don't like to see that. I'm a trial lawyer. I don't like to see the legal system used to promote any type of political gain. But put that aside, Casey's right. I mean, these are human beings. Think about it, Christina. Even with the Comey indictment, look, whether you like him or not, whether you think he did something wrong or not, he's a human being. He's got a family. All these other folks that might be out of jail that are thinking maybe somebody's going to come and grab them and try to put them back in jail. It just creates a sense of anxiety that I don't think we need in our country, because we're already dealing with a lot of other things. So my hope is that this really does kind of die out in the coming months.
All right. And so we'll continue to track this story and see what other reaction we may get from lawmakers in the future. As I put this up on your screen, one last look at what's being discussed here. It's the Autopen signature from former President Biden's presidency, different documents that he signed, and where things go from here. I want to thank you both for joining us here on Live Now from Fox.